plans to get all of England's primary school pupils back to school before the end of the summer term have been dropped. Around 8 million children will now remain at home until September at the earliest. The Education Secretary for England, Gavin Williamson, acknowledged that social distancing meant that the plans probably wouldn't work. And some pupils have already returned, but many parents decided not to send their children back. Teachers' leaders say that they warned the government repeatedly that the plans were not realistic. Our education correspondent Elaine Dunkley has this report.
12 minutes coming up with our initial ideas.
Today, a hard lesson for these primary school children. The rest of their friends from other years won't be joining them.
I'm kind of sad about it because a lot of my friends are still at home and I had a chance to meet them.
I thought it was quite upsetting and disappointing because it would have been better if I got to see them.
Welcoming all year groups back was always going to be a problem. There are 515 children at this school in Barnton in Cheshire. With smaller class sizes and social distancing, there is only the capacity for 153.
This is one of the classrooms that we've set up ready.
On top of that, concerns about the infection rate of coronavirus in Cheshire has meant this school is only open for children of key workers and those deemed vulnerable. How do you feel walking into this classroom and it's empty?
Oh, it's heartbreaking. It really is. We were so ready to have our year sixes back. I think it's predictable. There's no way that you could have all of your children back given the social distancing measures that we've had to put in place. So it just was never practical in the first instance.
So how about cities come on?
In theory, the government wanted all children in primary school to have some time in the classroom. Today, acceptance that it's not practical for all year groups to go back before the end of term.
While we are not able to welcome all primary children back for a full month before the summer, we continue to work with the sector on the next steps, where we'd like to see schools who have the capacity to bring back more children. We will be working to bring all children back to school in September.
But he was really quiet.
Some children in England will miss out on nearly a third of the school year. Those from disadvantaged backgrounds falling further behind. And it's not just about learning. For many vulnerable children, school provides a safety net.
We've got some children, more affluent children, who are literally attending Zoom school with lessons as normal. And we know that 90% of disadvantaged children aren't going online for more than 2 hours, if that.
And what does he do?
There are millions of children with a question mark over their education. And with schools ruling out a full return before summer, parents are asking, will it be any different come September?
I think it'd be extremely difficult for some kids and some families because it's a long time to try and recreate the structure that schools give you, and I think without that a lot of kids and a lot of families will struggle.
Naively, I thought it'd probably last 4 to 6 weeks, and here we are, I think 12 weeks later.
But I do think that children should start coming back to school gradually because we've got to get back to normality.
The plan is still for all schools in Wales to be fully open on June the 29th. Schools in Scotland and Northern Ireland will follow in August.
Head teachers are naturally problem solvers, so I think we could find solutions. There's always the possibility. We've had Nightingale hospitals, that we could have Nightingale classrooms. We could have marquees out on our field here at Barnton, but it's all about the funding.
Head teachers warned weeks ago that it would not be possible for all children to be back in the classroom. Now they say it's time to listen to their solutions. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News.
Well, ministers at Westminster say that they do realise this is a difficult time for families and that many feel anxious about their children going back to school. They insist that the welfare of children and staff will continue to be at the heart of decision-making. So what are the risks involved? Our science editor David Shukman has been investigating.
Queuing for the shops, a sight we'll see more of as more places are allowed to reopen. The hope being that inside them people will keep their distance, which should be easier to do than in schools, where the question of when to reopen has always been one of the toughest about ending the lockdown. A reminder of the challenge came at this primary school in Northampton. It got going again only for 2 support staff to test positive. For any school, reopening the gates involves a balance between risks and benefits, and that's made all the harder by the fact that the science on this is still evolving. So on some key questions, there are no clear-cut answers. So no surprise, some staff and some parents are more cautious than others. So what are the risks as far as we know? Luckily for children themselves, the evidence is that the vast majority are hardly affected by the virus. Teachers and other staff may be more vulnerable, though official figures suggest the risks are no worse than for anyone else. And although children seem less likely than adults to pass on the disease, activities around a school may encourage the virus to spread.
It's clear that children are at low risk of infections and getting sick from that. We know that already from many different countries, many different settings. But we have to manage the risk of transmission in the broader community. And I think especially that means managing the interactions around the school. Schools are a social hub.
So how in a school can everyone try to keep 2 metres apart? The desks have to be separated, which is easier to do in large schools than smaller ones. And gaps of 2 metres can be marked out, but that only works if the numbers coming into the schools are limited, like in offices and other workplaces.
It's difficult to see how you can do anything other than approach a return to school in the same way as, for example, some workplaces have approached shifts. So, for example, they're bringing half the office in one day, half the office the next, to maintain that social distancing.
So what lessons can be learned from other countries? In South Africa, schools are relying on masks and on checking for temperature. Children are asked if there's COVID in their families, and their desks are more spread out than usual.
Hi, Scott.
Denmark became the first country in Europe to reopen schools, and it was done with as much distancing as possible. And so far, there's been no rise in the number of infections. But the Philippines is taking no chances at all. Every school there will remain closed until a vaccine has been developed to keep people safe. David Shukman, BBC News.
Well, let's go live to Westminster and talk to our chief political correspondent, Vicki Young. Vicki, some people accusing the government of being apparently more keen to get shops reopened and to get schools reopened in England. What do you make of that?
I think the problem is that a lot of the emphasis at the moment is on reopening everything, getting back to normal life. So, of course, this announcement does jar somewhat. Shops will be open on Monday, theme parks will be opening soon, but millions of children won't be able to go back to school. Now, in the Commons today, I think the big fear is about those who are struggling already with their learning. A real anxiety that many children will be falling even further behind. Now, the government acknowledges that. They say they're going to come up with a big package of measures before the summer to try to make sure those children can catch up. But I think a really interesting intervention from the Children's Commissioner for England today. She thinks there's been really a failure of imagination, that the same will and determination that there's been to reopen parts of the economy have not been applied to schools. Now, of course, there have been huge logistical challenges. The government wanted to be safe. They say they don't make any apology for that, putting children in groups of 15. But of course, very quickly, you run out of classrooms and you run out of teachers. I think the big question tonight is if those restrictions are still in place in September, is there a plan to make it work, or will schools just have to come up with their own solutions?
Vicki, many thanks again. Vicki Young there for us at Westminster.